Belichick opened the vault to a certain extent to share, for really the first time, his views on the way things work. Here he is on this dynamic of leaks that occur prior to the draft.
I'd say the biggest newsmakers here quietly are the agents. Nobody wants their player to get picked higher than them. I've never told an agent, hey, we're going to take your guy in this round. We're going to take your guy with this, with the 27th pick or the 31st pick or whatever pick it is we have. I don't think there's too many teams that do that. But as you get closer to draft day, sometimes teams get closer to figuring out what they're going to do. There is information that can leak out of the organizations in one way or another that can give you some insight into what they're going to do. I think it's a little early for that, but when you get into the last, I'd say 12 or less hours before the draft, sometimes that information can be very, very accurate and helpful.
Now, that information never came from the Patriots, Chris, as you learned while working there. They don't tell anybody what's going on. When Nick Saban was the coach in Miami and they had the second pick in 2005, they actually told the people in the building they were taking Braylon Edwards, the receiver from Michigan, and took Ronnie Brown, the running back from Auburn, instead. There'll actually be, in some organizations, misinformation that is shared because it does get out. And the agents need to find out primarily so they can set the expectations of their clients.
Yeah, right.
You need to tell your client when the window opens and when the window closes. And the most important thing to tell your client is the floor. I guarantee you're going to be drafted by this spot. And that's part of the challenge of the final week of the draft. The agents trying to find out what the floor is for their clients, and then reporters trying to find out from the agents what those floors are. And I'm starting to get a little bit of that as we're a week away from the draft. Some stuff that we'll be talking about in the coming week that is informed by my conversations with the people whose job it is to know where guys are going to be picked.
Sure.
We're getting closer and closer to people finding that out.
Yeah, well, we talk about this from time to time, but the agents are so much more powerful in the NFL broader structure than the public realizes. They're manipulating things constantly. How coaches are hired, what coaches are hired, how GMs are hired, what player goes here, what player goes there. Wait, I don't want this player to go there because I got a player there making this kind of money, and if they sign this guy, they'll cut this guy, and now I won't get both of those paychecks. Wait, so I don't want to put him there. I'm going to try to finagle it to put him on another team so I can keep both of those checks coming. Way more power than people realize when it comes to that stuff. And, in New England, that wasn't going down. I mean, New England, here, I was like this, Mike, right? I'm at my desk. I'm blah, 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 work. I got a little cubicle right here. The draft room was right over my right shoulder, right? So it was always, locked to the point where, when Bill would come up there, right, he'd, look around, let me see, and he'd, wiggle his key, I swear somebody came to the door a few times, was like, New England clam chowder, the white or the red, right? I mean, it was like you couldn't go in there and look or do anything. There was only 3 people allowed in that room where the big board was. So not only was it locked and he'd look around and unlock it, right? Then you'd go in there and you'd go, oh, I can't wait to see the big board. You couldn't even see the big board. There was a metal garage door that went down and had a lock on that too. So you had to have now, let me turn that key into the wall so I can now turn and put the garage door up over the big board. Right? So that's how secretive they were there, and that's how secretive some teams can be. But, of course, they were the masters of that.
Who were the 3 people that were allowed in?
The Crafts, Nick Caserio. I feel like those were the only 3 that had, that had keys. And then, maybe Nick Caserio might bring Monty Ossenfort in with him at times, that I don't think Monty had a key, right? John Robinson might have had a key at that time as well, right? The old GM of the Tennessee Titans, but it was a very limited group, that's for sure.
It is a process that really does differ from team to team, and some are far more secretive than others. But I don't disagree with the notion that the agents have that information because they need to have it, because they need to tell their client.
They need to tell it. They want to boost it. All
you can't tell your client. Right. Yeah, right. And that's what we've said it about Lamar Jackson, he wouldn't have been picked number 32 in the draft if he had an agent fighting for him against the Bill Polians of the world when they were saying he should play a different position. If you have a top agent, you end up higher. And maybe it worked out perfectly for Lamar Jackson to go to Baltimore with pick number 32, and he's got his big contract now. But if the goal is to get drafted as high as possible when you're on your way in, having an agent who can press all the buttons. And I've seen it. I mean, Gary Wishard died the day the lockout began in 2011. And he's a guy I had gotten to know in the early days of PFT. He was relentless when it came to pushing his guys. He had Pac-Man Jones in 2005. And there were a couple of other high-end defensive backs. Antrell Roll, who entered, it wasn't quite sure whether he was a corner or a safety.
Yep, right.
There was another one in the top 10 that year. And Gary Wishard was relentless in pushing Pac-Man and pushing Pac-Man. But despite all the concerns, and the concerns were there from Morgantown, I knew people in scouting at the time were like, man, some of this stuff we're finding out. But still, he got him taken like 5th overall before any of the other guys.
Right.
It becomes like a life force. It just overwhelms you. We've seen it. We've seen people like that. The strength of the personality overwhelms you. And at the end of the day, you're dealing with human beings here, and there's a lot of subjectivity in the process. And if you have an agent who is committed to fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting, you're going to be successful if that's the agent representing you.
Yeah, I think that's very true, right? You know, the agents they're a big part of this. They really are. They got a lot of power and control throughout the league, and yeah, I mean, again, they got a lot of things they're trying to balance and worry, and I respect that and all of that. But yeah, they're framing a lot of conversations this time of the year. It is for knowledge of themselves, to boost up themselves, whatever else. I mean, they're manipulating who goes on what media show or whatever, because this guy will talk good about my guy. This guy didn't. I'll never let him on that show again. I'm
not aware of anybody doing that.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, but they're way more powerful than I think people realize. Right.
By the way, you mentioned the steps to which Bill Belichick went in New England to protect his draft board.
Yeah.
Then you have his potential next boss.
Here's the board.
Maybe their first meeting. Here it is. Here it is. Now, that should not be confused with the pad of paper on which he had a bunch of doodles and squiggles at the combine. That at least was something that I think people zoomed in and gleaned actual information.
They did.
From the draft board.
Yes.
So that's one of the reasons why Jason Garrett, our NBC colleague, thinks there's no way that Jerry Jones and Bill Belichick could ever work together. That is a prime example. That is one of the things I think Jason would point to. Look at how secretive Bill Belichick is, and here's Jerry showing the draft board to the whole world.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.